Tonight we're going to discuss private sector growth. My name is Stephen Enti. Now, I believe you've heard this mantra before that the private sector is the engine of growth. Ghana has a relatively good international reputation with respect to political stability and macroeconomic reforms. But the question is this translating down to the business environment? Over the years, we've been told repeatedly that Ghana's environment is great for business. But is that really so? How is the private sector performing in the face of the energy crisis as well as the water problems that are confronting us? Tonight, we'll talk business, real business, your business, with a man who knows and has experienced it all. My guest tonight is Nana Osei Bonsu, who is Chief Executive Officer of the Private Enterprise Foundation. You can join us by text 1760, or you can post your Facebook comments on our wall, facebook.com/Joy News. And then if you're active on Twitter, you can send us a tweet. Our handle is Joy News on TV. So you're welcome, sir. It's great to have you on the show.
Thank you.
My first question is that we keep talking about the private sector being the engine of growth. Is our private sector in Ghana growing?
Yes and no.
Yes and
There's
no.
a sector that's growing. There's sectors that are not growing. You have the mining industry, the telecoms industry. Those are growing. The oil and gas, those are growing. But if you take our SME sector, they're not. If you take our grid sector, it's not. You take the industrial manufacturing sector, it's not. So yes and no, but it depends on what you're looking for, what kind of growth, which areas. Because I think the government's policy is going forward is going to be agricultural-led development.
Structure, our country's structure, and the kinds of things that promotes development and growth among ordinary citizens. What would you say our private sector should be looking like? Where should the concentration be?
You know, you cannot do any growth without the raw material base. And people are talking about industrialization, manufacturing, all. You will need raw materials to do that. And so we have to start from the base. And the base is the raw material, agriculture, the areas that can feed your industries. Once you've covered that base, then you can look at the manufactured raw materials to be able to move forward. So we have abundance of the raw material base for the processing and manufacturing, for preservation and storage facilities. So we have to start from that angle. And if we use that base to prepare our industrialization, to prepare our manufacturing, we'll be doing wonderful. Then we can tackle the other angles.
And so how do you assess the performance of the raw material base among your members? Are they well into that area, and are they doing well?
No, as I indicated earlier, agriculture is the raw material base, and it's declining. So obviously we need to look at it and revamp the production of the raw materials. Agriculture itself has not been looked at as a business. We've looked at it as
a food basket.
Right, a subsistence level of getting something to eat and maybe the excess capacity you can sell. So now that under the Ghana Commercial Agriculture Project, that we look at it from the holistic commercial as a business, we now look at how do we create the quantum of raw materials to feed our industrial base. And do we have the capacity and the equipment in the industrial base to also absorb the sustainable supply that is going to be generated when we come on board on commercial basis.
But this decline you talk about, why has it been so? You just gave us one example that we don't see agriculture as a business. But over the years, I mean, why is it that with our Greek being the mainstay of our social structure, why has it been declining, agricultural growth being declining?
Because as I said, because we're not looking at it from the commercial point of view, not from the perspective as a business. So we're not putting in the extra efforts and the resources needed. You don't have any insurance in agriculture, no insurance coverage, no risk coverage for agriculture. So, and the biggest, until recent times, maybe the past 5-7 years, where you have businesses from overseas coming to do commercial farming. Everything is about 5 acres tops, 10 acres max, and so that is not something that lends itself to commercial agriculture. Once you have huge plantations, 100,000 hectares, 50,000 hectares, these are commercially viable opportunities to do commercial farming. So now that we look at it from that angle, what other ingredients or infrastructure do we need? Irrigation, we depend on rain-fed agriculture. But it should not be seasonal, it can be all 4 seasons, in a sense that throughout the year, you have areas where you can do 3 seasons. Once you harvest in one, the plow and the others are following the harvester, and the irrigation is flowing through, so you can do year round. And that is a job creation opportunity that can be undertaken.
But I mean, what is stopping the private sector in launching an aggressive investment directive into that area?
It's a great opportunity, but we're constrained by the infrastructure deficiencies, the lack of resources, funding. We don't have, agriculture demands long-term funding, but we have only short-term funding in our system, no long-term. So if we're going to depend on financing within the system to do agriculture, we're going to be shortchanged. So there's a need for capital mobilization to provide long-term funding, pool of funding to go into that sector. There's a need for technical expertise as well. Agriculture farm managers, even when you see people sitting on a tractor, you think everybody can drive a tractor and maybe till the land. They can do it in a way that affects the nutritious value of the land. So these are things, the technical expertise, the infrastructure, the financing, those are the constraints that are very challenging.
And they've become a put-off
for
private
investors,
right?
Almost very difficult for private sector too.
So beyond agri, what about manufacturing?
The manufacturer is going to manufacture something. And what are you going to manufacture? That's the raw materials. And the raw material, as I'm saying, is coming from the agri. So when there's a vacuum on the development and supply of the raw material, the manufacturer is also going to be empty. And so that's an area, because unless you manufacture something that is chemically produced, then that's a different ballgame. But you're now going to depend on the processing of maize, soybean, all these kind of things, into a semi-product, finished product, or a completely full product. So the raw material base is what dictates how the manufacturing is going to go. So the basis is, let's step back, look at the value chain from the production of the raw material through the processing, and then to the market that can absorb what we produce.
We've heard talks about Ghana having a very friendly business environment and all. Is that what it is? I mean, listening to some of these things you're telling us and the constraints that you've brought out, does it appear that Ghana is investment friendly?
Oh, it's investment friendly. It doesn't mean that it has all the resources. It doesn't mean that it's giving you all the tools that you need. Some of them you have to produce it yourself or generate it yourself. But so far as investor friendly, I think we're looking at the administrative capacities, the right to invest any and everywhere you can do on the basis of an agreement that you can procure, and the right to return your investments or the returns on your investments home and take your money with it. Those are the friendliness that we're talking about. The right to import without any restrictions so far as you're going to use it for whatever intended purpose, it's not legal purposes, and the tariffs are transparent. Those are administrative capacities, administrative machinery. But if you come to the nitty-gritty,
these are fine.
These are fine.
Okay.
These are fine. There's room for improvement, yes, but those are all right. All right. But when you come to the resource angle, the funding, the infrastructure deficiencies, look at the power outages, look at the ration of water. How are you going to be able to do any industrialization without power?
So these are killing private sector initiatives.
Definitely. They actually, a lot of businesses will collapse if nothing is done about it for the next 6 months.
So how are you thriving then?
Well, you know, the resiliency of the businessman cannot be underestimated, in the sense that the businessman is looking to survive. So whatever the situation, they may go the extra mile, what they have accumulated on the side, to possibly show up the difference as of now for the time being. But it doesn't mean they can survive, or everybody has the cushion to fall back on. So they actually looking, they're not investing, recycling things to get on until things get better. Yeah.
Let's talk about tariff restrictions and programs like the EPA and AGOA that are there to perhaps encourage, you know, access, open access and better access to European markets and American markets. You know, is Ghana's private sector taking advantage at all?
You can only sell what you produce. If you not produce anything and they give you the entire world, you can sell because you have nothing to sell. So the agreement may be there that you have an open sesame, open corridor, open window to bring your goods to the market. But if you don't produce, you cannot sell. So let's look at turning these agreements into developmental agreements that can assist us to, let's take the case of cutting our post-harvest losses to zero. Once you take the post-harvest and you process them, you preserve them, you create a longer shelf life, then you can determine where you're going to sell it.
And these are realistic targets. Which
these are things that you got to do. So if you sign an agreement or you look at an agreement that says, okay, you come to the market and sell everything you want, and you look around and you don't have anything to sell, the agreement is of no use to you. But we can turn that agreement, as similar agreements, into developmental so that it allows and helps us to produce. Then we look at the markets.
In 2001, the Kufuor administration declared the golden age of business. If you look back, do you think we are seeing dividends or fruits of these declarations?
Unfortunately, I wasn't around, so I don't know what happened. But looking at the terrain today, there might have been efforts made, but I don't see much gain so far as development of the private sector. I think there's a long ways and a lot of things that we can do to improve the private sector. One, support system. Where is the funding arrangement which is available everywhere in the world, in various countries, to support their private sector? What do we have? About 2 or 3. And are they enough quantum resources in their pool to assist the private sector? 2, the infrastructure deficiencies. These are constraints. 3, the cost of money. If you compare Ghana to even our neighbor Senegal, look at the interest rate in Senegal compared to Ghana. We're borrowing at 27%, and they're borrowing about 9% or less than 10%. You can't compete in a world like that. So with lack of all these things and put together the cost of money, cost of production, you are already down in the pit. There's no way that you can compete.
So can you share perhaps a few examples, item by item, some of the unique challenges that your members are facing, which is likely to lead to a lot of collapse?
Oh, the item by item is what I just elaborated on.
Energy, water.
Energy, power. Now, you go to work, there's no energy. You're a productive institution. What are you going to produce? People said, why don't they buy generators? If you buy a generator, it's additional cost. And it got, I think our estimate is it adds about 29% of your cost than if it were using the grid. So this is additional cost. If you add that to the high prices of gasoline, if you add that to the high cost of money, I don't see how you can become profitable. If you take that away, the water rationing. So these elements are what are making us uncompetitive. How do we address that? As I said, number one, capital mobilization. Money can do a lot of things. Money is the common denominator, the driver of change, the driver of industrialization. If you take money, then the brains to drive the money, the technical expertise. These are angles that we're looking to do to enhance private sector.
But do we as a country have the avenues to enhance technical expertise?
Oh, yes, we do have avenues. We have schools, we have tertiary institutions, we have vocational institutions.
But there are concerns that our schools are feeding industry with the wrong skills.
Thank you. So it doesn't mean we have to stay without taking any action. We can go back to the drawing board and see between academia and the private sector, what are the needs of the private sector? How do we draw the curriculum that can produce the kind of expertise or technical skilled person to go into the private sector? We have 4 years. Maybe we can look at the 4 years and say, within the 4 years, we will reduce the core courses by 1 year to give them practical experience spread out over the 4-year period. 3 months the first year, 3 months the second year, 6 months the third year. So when the person comes out in the 4th year, he has a knowledge of where he wants to go, a knowledge of what the industry needs, and that he will be fully ready to take on the industry.
But it does appear to me that successive governments and leadership in this country have failed in the area of ensuring that graduates from our training institutions, whether polytechnic or traditional university systems, don't fit into the job market easily. Do you face such frustrations among your members where you're not able to employ the right skills to drive particular objectives which you have?
Yes, the private sector is crying loud and clear that, you know, we're not getting the technically skilled output from the schools. But is it the fault of the government, or is it the fault of the leadership that draws the curriculum, or is it maybe lack of, you know, collaboration between private sector and academia to see that, look, this is what we're looking for. This is what I think the private sector needs. There must be a collaboration. We actually talking to, I'll give an example, GIMPA, on a research basis to see how the case studies, the deficiencies and difficulties of the private sector can be turned into case studies but for the students. So this way the guy will see that, oh, this is what happened, and these were the remedies and these were the results. So this is something that we don't always have to want government to come and intervene with his big hand and say, okay, this is A, B, C that we're going to do, or that's X, Y, Z we're going to do. We can do those things ourselves. And we have to do a collaborative activity or efforts between academia and the private sector to be able to come to terms and to see what each other needs.
Did you bring some of these concerns to the attention of the vice president when you had a meeting with him?
Oh, you can't bring everything to the table. There are a lot of things, a plethora of issues that we need to discuss, and we talked about the power shortages, definitely, because if you look at the power outages, within a year, you're losing about 116 days of power. That is a big constraint on production. And if you talk about the other 249 or whatever it is, and that you're not even getting adequate, sustainable supply. So you definitely reducing our capacity to produce. If you're talking about the high cost of money, that as a consequence of a huge budget deficit that the government has to come to the market to borrow, obviously there's something that we have to discuss because the government has an effort in that direction. So those things that the government can do, we discuss that. Those things that we can do, we're not going to bring that to the government. As I said, collaborative effort between private sector and academia, that's not for me a government intervention. That is the two parties to get together. But government intervention is how much do they go to the market to borrow? How can the government, with this opportunity to go to the debt market, go out and borrow from private banks? And if the private bank is lending to the government, definitely it's going to charge an arm and a leg for the private sector to borrow from them. So these are areas that we have discussions with the level.
What assurances were you giving? I mean, were there assurances that
it's not a panacea overnight that, you know, we said, oh, okay, we take the magic wand and tomorrow we weed it out and
whip it in place.
It's going to be in place. No, it's an effort in the right direction that, okay, we're going to look into that. We see the avenues and the structures that we can put in place to remedy the situation.
When I brought in the issue of the economic partnership agreements and AGOA, etc., we didn't pan the discussion back in terms of importation of goods into our country. I know the Private Enterprise Foundation is concerned about our markets being turned into a dumping ground. Did you bring this up in your discussion as well?
Oh, definitely. We have said that 1,000 times again. But for the meantime, it's Private Enterprise Federation as of yesterday.
Private Enterprise
Federation. Yes, indeed. How do we prevent dumping of fake goods, second-hand goods in our markets? We have allowed that because we have a vacuum. We're not producing, so everybody can bring anything they want and we patronize it. But we have to keep an eye. If we ourselves, the private sector importer, who is importing raw materials, who is importing the equipment, realize that I have respect for corporate intellectual property rights and protection, you're not going to take fake goods. We encourage our people, do not, because at the end of the rainbow, it might cost you less upfront to take it, but in the long run, from production to the cost of running, you pay almost 2 or 3 times as much. So these are issues that the industry itself, the businessmen themselves, have to cultivate to do. You don't need government intervention, because under the WTO and the various agreements, there must be reciprocity or free access to goods in your country.
And how successful are you getting on with that collaboration among your members to ensure that these issues are
It takes
resolved?
some time for education to stay. It takes some time because, especially for a poor person, when a poor businessman, you don't have the money, you want to do production. You say, well, you bend backwards and accommodate things that you definitely or normally wouldn't do. And that is something that if we encourage our people and we do the right things and they become profitable, I think we can win them away from these kind of subscription and patronage of fake goods.
What is the level of your working, your federation's cooperation with policymakers, government institutions, and the relevant establishments that are supposed to create or be responsible for creating the enabling environments for you to thrive?
Let me admit, I think previously there were ad hoc type of relationship. When there's a need, you seek a meeting, and then as the conditions prevail, then you can meet and discuss issues. Maybe when the issues have become almost irrelevant or not at the prime time. But now we have instituted quarterly meetings with the vice president and the economic management team that we would do every quarter. We have a biannual meeting under the private sector development strategy, which is twice a year with the presidency. So there's now a structured arrangement in place to engage the dialogue with the hierarchy.
And what's the purpose for that?
The purpose is to address the constraints, because you're never going to have a free constraint environment. There are always going to be issues. So at least for us to advise government that these are issues, if you don't know, that is preventing private sector from being efficient, preventing private sector from becoming profitable. After all, private sector profitability leads to revenue generation to government. Yeah. So it's in their best interest to know whether the conditions are favorable for profitable margins for the private sector.
So walk us through, many of our listeners might not exactly understand what you do in terms of, as a federation, to promote businesses and what benefits your members get from being members of the federation.
Well, I think of everything that I've said is a benefit to members, and everybody from the private businessman who joins association is looking for benefit. The same way our member institutions are looking for benefit to pass through to their constituent members. So it's in the interest of PEF, it's in our business and our mandate to make sure the playing field is level, to do the advocacy to advise government of the constraints that we're talking about, to advise government of opportunities that they possibly are not aware that they can create in partnership with the private sector, and to also see government to realize that private sector is an equal partner and much more the one that brings the bacon home. So these are the things that our members, they might have sectorial issues that they may deal on their own. But when it comes to cross-sectorial issues, the Private Enterprise Federation takes precedence, and does that in behalf of all the private sector.
Are you happy with your members' business, the rate at which they're growing? I mean, as a federation, are you content, regardless of all the challenges? Are you happy?
Not at all.
In this working
Not
environment?
What makes
you unhappy?
Because if, as I indicated, industrial sector is declining, agriculture is declining, and you're not getting much out of. These are the job creation activities or institutions. And if they're not creating jobs, you have a lot of young population coming out of universities. So where are they going to go? Not on the public payroll, because as a single spine is eroding government's pockets. Obviously, look at private sector to be able to absorb. So we're not happy the way we grow it, because we need to grow at least 10% a year, private sector itself. Need to grow at least 10%. When I talk about private sector, let me separate the big conglomerates. They're doing fine. The mining industry, the bank industry is bulging the seams to profit, right? The telecoms. Those are the things. How do we nurture the success sector to handhold, babysit, mentor the other sector to grow? These are angles we're working hard to bring all our members into the fray to look like, let's work together. If the SME sector can become profitable, then maybe they look at the telecoms, they look at the mining industry and see how best can you assist us? What do we need to do to be able to provide services to you? Then we can also grow as well. So these are the things that because there's no one private sector versus another private sector. When we say advocacy, we advocate with government, but we also advocate within ourselves and among ourselves. So at least to make us grow and become competitive.
Well, my name is Stephen Enti, and I'm here with Nana Osei-Bonsu, who is the Chief Executive Officer of the Private Enterprise Federation. We're discussing private sector growth, and tonight is Corporate Wednesday, PM Express. You can join us, text 1760 across all networks, and you can post your comments on our Facebook walls, facebook.com/Joy News. And if you're active on Twitter, our handle is Joy News on TV. We'll take a quick break. We'll be right back. Welcome back to PM Express. We're discussing tonight private sector growth, and I have the Chief Executive Officer of the Private Enterprise Federation, Nana Osei-Bonsu, in the studio to help us with this discussion. So before we went on the break, we were discussing whether you were happy and your association is happy. You said no. What exactly do you want, and who do you want it from?
You see, for the private sector to perform, certain things have to be in place. And those are the things that I elaborated on: the power sector, the access to long-term funding, even if it's not low cost, and the technical capacities to drive our industries. These are things that need to be in place for private sector competitiveness, for private sector successes. So those are the areas that we need to improve. And we've been talking, and we think that there are opportunities. Capital mobilization should not be something difficult, because we have the pension schemes, and everywhere else in the world, long-term capital is generated from two sources: the pension angle and the insurance industry. Our insurance industry is not at that level that they can generate that kind of pool funding. So we have the pension industry, the three-tier pension industry, if created in a way to attract participation. And the key words I'm using here, attract participation. You may have that on board, but once you don't attract participation, you don't get the patronage that you're looking for. Let me give an example. In Ghana, we have about 12 million workers, self-workers, somebody's employees and all. Only 963,000 are covered under any form of pension. Look at the vacuum, the big numbers that are not covered. And these guys and everybody, unless those who pass on, are going to retire. What are they're going to retire on? There's a need for a strong pension scheme to attract somebody to put away some money for the twilight or sunset period. If we look at this 10 million plus and take 3 million of that, at least at most 3 million, and everybody puts away 20 cedis a month, it comes to 720 million Ghana cedis a year. Multiply that by 5, you got about 3.5 billion. That's only for 3 million at 20 cedis. And somebody says, oh, people cannot make ends meet. How do they set aside 20 cedis a month? I think we all have cell phones. A lot of people spend more than 20 cedis a month on cell phones. Yeah. How do we attract them to wean themselves from the cell phone to put away the 20 cedis for tomorrow? This 20 cedis pool, that goes into an investment angle, activities are going to yield returns, they're going to yield taxes, they're going to create employment. So these are the things that we have to sit down and do the research analysis to see that how can we create that quantum to do what we need to do and what are the expected impact that they're going to generate. So we think that we have the opportunities, we have to just take the bull by the horn and then make the policy initiative that yes, indeed, we will devote X amount. How do you attract? Under the pension scheme, you can use your accumulated funding for your own education or for the education of your ward. But we also know that it allows you to use that for your primary home. Every Ghanaian wants to own a home. So how do we make it attractive for the Ghanaians to participate, to build up the nest that they can use as collateral to borrow towards their own family home? We can incentivize them that if you put your money in a pool of fund for maybe 7 years to 10 years, government will allow additional 25% to whatever you have in your chest to go and borrow. You will see a lot of people jumping up to put their money in the pension scheme that would then multiply later on. Said, where is the government going to get the 25%? The monies that they put in the pool are going to be invested. If you have a multiplier effect of 5, they're going to generate a lot of taxes, a lot of revenue to government that they can afford to send some back to the people so at least they can create a pool.
But why haven't you been able to encourage, as a federation, changes and innovation in the system to make all these things possible?
Well, we can only advise. We do not initiate. Yeah. We do not decide. So once you advise with the empirical data to support, and this what I said is there for everybody. We wrote the third-tier pension scheme, the third-tier long-term savings that was turned into the pension scheme is there, and all the results are there, and the impact analysis are all there. So the thing is, sometimes I sympathize with government because they also look at other demands on the revenue, other demands on the resources. But let's look at which ones would bring the bacon home, which ones we look at the job creation and create a revenue base for government. So if we look at that from that perspective, there are things that we can be emboldened and take a bold step and take action, and they will yield results later on.
When we started, you singled out the telecom industry, for example, the oil industry, for example, and you said that these were growing. Now, when you look at the mismatch between the growth patterns of these industries against that of agriculture, for example, what do you foresee to be happening if that pattern continues, at least for the next 10 years?
Absolute dependency on these industries. But there's no need for that. We can do a lot of diversification, which is necessary, because everybody is talking about oil and gas, and then they say the oil curse or the... No. We have to come up with some approach for diversification. How do we get the industry that is expanding and grow with the telecoms to also possibly plow back some of the money into agriculture? We can suggest that maybe rules of engagement, they can put some of their profit margins into long-term pool of funding into sectors that are unrelated to what they do. There are avenues that we can talk. There's nothing that a businessman would not do if you encourage them with incentives.
And this must be done by policy.
This can be done because the incentive has to come from government. The policy has to come from government. The private sector will acquiesce or will participate if it's attractive. So that's why we talk to government, engage in a dialogue to bring attention that these are opportunities that we can create. These are opportunities that we can do. And then it benefits everybody, a win-win situation for all.
If we take the oil, for example, oil industry, there have been concerns that we still have not been able to effectively take advantage of a good percentage of local content participation. This is worrying for your industry, your federation, right?
You see, local content is something that has to be encouraged. You cannot force that down somebody's throat. They're in the business to make money. They're private businesses. And they have the right to, to the employers or employees or the people they do business with. But there are also rules of engagement. And that's why I said, if you dialogue, you can get the best out of everybody. So if we want participation, which is ownership structure, ownership percentage of that industry, we have to go for it. After all, every businessman or everything is for sale. If you give them the right incentive, they will sell a percentage to you. So if that's what we want, we have to make a policy decision. And other countries have done it with endowment, with some kind of angle where they can purchase a percentage of the industry. Fine. We have to go for that. If we're talking about local content, the use of local raw materials, are they available? Are those sustainable? Are they the quality that can be used? We have to look at it from that perspective. So if that's what we need, let's bring it to the table. That we'd like to, as this current budget indicated, government construction is going to use about 60% of local raw materials. Do we have that? If we give me the quantum numbers that the 60% translates into 50 or 100 million, the private sector would now get up and say there's a possibility of my getting a portion of the 100 million. So I will strategize, I will retool, I'll create equipment and provide that raw material. But unless we know the numbers, if we're going to spend 2 million and the pot is 1.5, you overspent. So the policy has to come with some numbers that are transferable, translatable, that can be understood by the private sector. So those are another angle. Diversification, as I said. And as we talk about the participation, we're now talking about the use of local raw materials. The other one is outsourcing services and products. Do we have that? That is the easiest that can be done. Because if you incentivize the big conglomerates with tax relief for every percentage that they use local raw material. And as of now, the government has put together a legislation, and Guinness is taking advantage of it. Because we had actually worked with Guinness to provide a sorghum as a substitute for raw imported barley. Guinness saw that there's a potential. Now government has allowed that. So for every raw material substituted for imported ones, they get a percentage of tax rebate. So these are incentives that you can look at, and Guinness is looking and asking everybody, look, if you want to produce for us, yes, locally we want to work with you and produce efficient raw materials. Because it's in their best interest, they're going to get a tax advantage, their bottom line is going to increase. So the incentives are the key to some of these things. The other one is the employment. The technical skills have to be there for somebody to employ anybody. I think your bosses look at you that you had the savviness and the understanding to do what you're doing before they employ you. So we have to train the people. We have to sit down, and I said that earlier on, between private sector, academia, to see that, okay, what are the needs of that oil and gas industry? How do we produce for them? Maybe we don't have the trainers. Maybe the oil and industry, we can go to them and say, pre-finance something, and then we will produce for you. Because we cannot sit idle in our own country with our resources for people to come in temporarily and go and come whilst we have empty stomach and we have empty mouths and people sitting and watching the world go by. So we have to take the bulls by the horns and look at it from that perspective that let's meet the private sector, the government, incentivize the private sector, the oil and gas, that if you do this, this is what you gain out of it. people are ready to jump if we offer them something, but we have to work at it together. And I don't believe those are all exclusively the responsibility of government. But if government is going to make the law, then they also have to make sure that it's implementable and it's implemented in a way that is going to create a win-win situation for all.
Well, my name is Stephen Anti, and you're watching Nana Osei Bonsu, Chief Executive Officer of the Private Enterprise Federation. We'll take another break and we'll be right back. Stay. Welcome back to PM Express Corporate Wednesday. You can still join us by text 1760, post your Facebook comments on our Facebook walls, or send us a tweet if you're active on Twitter. Our handle is Joy News on TV. So, Nana, let's shift the discussion to other areas. We've spoken about the oil industry. We've spoken about the demand for the requisite skill. Do you think that we've become a mixed bag of too many problems as a country?
Oh, I think every country has problems, but we have to address our problems. So I don't see that the problems are insurmountable. They are doable. We can take care of them. If we put our hearts together and work together, we can do.
Well, you look at Ghana, 56 years on, do you see progress in private sector growth and ensuring or equipping the private sector to be what it is, the engine of growth?
You see, Ghana's private sector is young, had not been given the requisite exposure to do what it needs to do. From colonial days, the public sector has always done everything. Post-independence days, we had state enterprises from shoes down to laundry. So the public was doing everything. So the private sector was not given any serious consideration until the 1992 Constitution that enshrined private initiatives in the Constitution. So barely we have been, 21 years. So the private sector is actually growing in the sense of trying to find its own self and to be able to do what we need to do.
And the progress is good?
The progress is definitely not, no, the progress definitely is not good. The progress, as I said earlier, can be better because of lack of things that are not there, and those are the things that we're looking that they should be in place. As I said earlier, the infrastructure deficiencies, the lack of long-term capital, and the technical and the skill set to drive our industry. And so these are things, and so we have not, most of our private sector SMEs have not done business the proper way because they didn't know how. They haven't been generations upon generations of activity whereby the constraints and the gaps have been ironed out so they become smooth and efficient. These are the areas that the business association are working with their constituent members to know that these are the best practices. If we go to agriculture, now everybody is looking at best practices, mechanization, inputs, fertilizers. The same way with the other side of the business. How do they have succession plan, internal controls, record keeping? Record keeping is one of the areas that we're very deficient. A business sometimes doesn't even know whether they're making money or they're losing money. Because as soon as at the end of the day there's money coming in the till, they forgot how much it costs to produce it. So they will make sure that, oh, we got money today, only to add up at the end of the year to realize that we lost. So the private sector itself is evolving to become efficient. But we need the help of the availability of long-term funding, availability of infrastructure, and other things to be able to do what we need to become competitive. After all, this is a global village, and the Ghanaian private sector is not living in isolation. It's competing with things that are coming in. So we have to make sure that we grow to the level where we can meet competition head on.
All right. You have been the Chief Executive Officer for the Federation for how long? Since 2011?
Since 2011, yes.
2011. Now,
2011? This is what, 2013? Yes,
30,
2011.
so
July 2011.
2011.
Yes.
So, I mean, if you look at your role since you've been CEO, would you say enough small businesses have started? Small business startups. How has it been?
No, to be frank, I haven't done research on that angle to show whether there have been more startups in my during my time or less. We haven't done research.
So can you speak about startups generally?
Oh, startups, from my experience in previous activities, startups are a way that you bring innovations into the system. Things that are not there, somebody sees a vacuum or somebody sees a gap and wants to fill and create a startup. But these are not easy things to do. Startups, as I said, there are no other funding resources to help startups. Because if you're a startup and you go out to borrow, you don't have a product, you don't have an income stream, and what are you going to use to service your debt? It's the same money you borrow that is going to go back and use some to pay back. So at the end of the rainbow, you are back in the hole. So there must be resources that are available for startups. Those that they can long-term without any repayment schedule for maybe 3, 4, 5 years until they gel to a level where they have an income stream coming in and they plow back the income into a little expansion to a level where they now feel comfortable that, yes, we are here, now we have this product, we can protect the product against competition, and now we can go out and borrow. Not that loans are bad. There are areas that you need to get a loan instead of maybe a partnership. But for startups, definitely credit is not the way to go.
All right. So, I mean, it does sound, from what you're saying, that it's really almost impossible for small businesses to start under the current climate we are in. Is that what it is?
I disagree with that. No, I wouldn't say it's impossible because there are other sources. You see, as much as they're not prevalent resources, there are other areas that if you look, sometimes you can get. They are what we call private.
Which areas will these
You
be?
go to church. You belong to your church. If your church believes in you and you are a participant in church and you bring a viable opportunity to your church leadership, sometimes they can support you. You belong to a fraternity. And those are areas that Ghanaian businesses have not tapped into. Those are areas that we think we should explore and also give the opportunities to the churches and the other fraternities to become investors, limited partners in an investment scheme to be able to also share in the pie that will be generated in the long run.
Whilst helping groom new businesses. Do you think that under the current climate of energy challenges, water challenges, constrained with financing, churches and informal institutions, federations, as you mentioned, will be willing to put their money into such risks?
The money has to go somewhere. And if you're not going to put under your bed where there's no returns, then you have to look at the opportunities that you can create by reviewing and doing a critical analysis of the inherent risk and where you're going to put your money. So if you've done that, there must be some opportunities. As I said, agricultural sector is a vast opportunity for a lot of people. Post-harvest storage facilities, transportation, refrigerated transportation. These are areas that nobody has done. But somebody is in the real estate business and he doesn't see his way clear with the real estate business. He can get partner with somebody to do a warehouse that can possibly store some of the produce for the farmers. So there are opportunities. We have to have the critical analysis. Those possibly, as I said, the human element that is going to do the critical analysis might also be in short supply and might not be lending itself to making it viable for us to go into certain opportunities.
Is there hope for private businesses?
Oh, yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. I just said that the opportunity in the agricultural sector, there's tremendous hope. Gradually, as we dialogue and keep talking, we will come to the quantum situation where we provide the necessary tools and structures in place for private sector. We cannot go on like this. So, and I believe that there's tremendous hope for private sector to evolve into a competitive private sector that would lead the development of the country.
What about infrastructure? We haven't discussed infrastructure a lot. Your members, what challenges do they face with infrastructure? Bad roads, lack of address systems for which you can rely on, challenges with housing. What are the challenges that private businesses face with infrastructure?
I think you just said lack of addressing system, where you don't even know where you're going. You can't find anywhere. Bad roads. That's one thing, though. Within the 56 years of our existence, I think planning didn't go well.
We've been very poor with planning,
right, right. And I think that there are sectors that needed the assistance in planning and refurbishing and maintenance. The maintenance culture in our system is a little low. So if we are to do things...
Is it non-existent or low? Is that how you describe it?
I would say low for the time being. I wouldn't say non-existent because there's some. I would say low. Look at Accra Tema motorway. We don't always have to cut corners. I'm comparing two roads. The Accra Tema motorway and the new bypass road in Koforidua. That was done about a year and a half, 2 years ago.
Through the Polytechnic.
And if you look at how long the Accra Tema motorway had been in existence, and look at how short this one had been in existence.
And it's already showing signs of deterioration.
So we have to have a monitoring and evaluation system that is constantly evaluating what we are doing and how and what results we're getting out of these kind of arrangements. Once we do that, then we hold people who don't perform. We hold them accountable. There must be a performance bond or something. And if there was a performance bond on the Koforidua motorway, obviously somebody would have taken the money and let them pay for it. But that possibly didn't happen. So there are structures to put in place, as I keep saying, that can allow efficiency to be generated in what we do. Unless we do that and keep monitoring what we do and the maintenance culture cultivated, we possibly are in for a little difficult future.
What about individual attitude, the attitudes of the general citizens? Does that affect our growth in any way, whether private sector or public sector?
I'm no psychologist, but let me
anyway.
Let me just say that I think we can improve on our attitudes and in a way that we should be go-getters. We should be people who are willing to sacrifice to do the right things instead of wanting to get the benefit without it.
We should be punctual to work.
Without the effort. Yes, punctual to work, respect contracts, respect quality, and don't always want to cheat. And because nobody's looking, I'm going to take and run. Those kind of attitudes, I think we can change them. As I said, I'm no psychologist, but these are little things that we all observe.
Right, and also, I'll ask you one final question before we go. What Ghana do you want to see in the next 5 years?
Oh, a prosperous Ghana that has the right for every individual to do what they want to do within the rule of law, that shows a kind of respect for governance, respect for each other. My cardinal principle in life is love thy neighbor as thyself. So if you love yourself and you love your neighbor as yourself, you're not going to do harm to anybody. That's the future that I want Ghana to be. Are
you seeing that we're on course for this future?
God willing, we should be.
God willing, we should be. My name is Stephen Anti, and Nana Osei-Bonsu is Chief Executive Officer of the Private Enterprise Federation. And thanks to you for making time to stay with us on PM Express Corporate Wednesday. Join us again tomorrow for another edition. Good night.